My name is Jeremy Fultz, and I have a guest with us today, Chebon Kernell. Chebon, thanks for joining us today.
No, thank you for having me, Jeremy.
Chebon is a traditional leader at the Hullaby Ceremonial Ground and also one of the few Native American New Testament scholars in our tribe. Chebon, tell us a little bit about how you got into the New Testament side of things.
I was raised in the church, and specifically in the United Methodist Church. Baptized at the age of 12. I can remember going to vacation Bible schools at various churches throughout eastern Oklahoma. And so really that was my life. Now, I did have a unique experience growing up. My grandfather and my grandparents were members of one of our ceremonial communities, so I did have some exposure to what I call our indigenous identity. And it is what I believe it planted the seeds of knowing where I come from. Now, does that mean that I did everything that our peoples have always done? Did I fast and do all of those things? No. Primarily my focus was being what we would call a good Christian person. And so that was kind of my life growing up, even as I went into my graduate studies at Oklahoma City University. I can remember some of our old ministers even just talking about how proud they were that I was taking these steps and getting my education. And even before I declared that I was going to be a preacher, they were saying, Chebon's going to be a preacher one day. I can remember even one of my elders, one of our tribal elders, Reverend Harry Long, asking me to get up and speak as an 18-year-old, and I'm sitting there like, well, what do I have to offer? I'm not anything. But it was through persons such as him that saw something within my life. And so as time went on, actually after I graduated from OCU, I was actually heading to law school. And I was prepared. I took my LSAT. I was ready to enroll. I was looking for scholarships, gathering letters of recommendation. And then all of a sudden, it dawned on me that even that would not have fulfilled what I was feeling. To go to law school, I wanted to serve our people. I wanted to defend our sovereignty as tribal people. I wanted to do all those things. And I didn't think that was enough. And so I accepted my call into Christian ministry. And this was at the age of probably 24, maybe 23. It's getting all hazy now as I get older. But it was at that moment where I said, instead of law school, I'll enroll in graduate seminary and go get my graduate degree, Master's of Divinity. So that's what I did. And it was during that journey that I began to see something that I had never seen before. I began to be exposed to academic scholarship that I had never heard preached from pulpits. And it shocked me when I began to study the construction of the Bible. One of the things that we looked at is that during the era, for those that are Christians, during the era of Jesus' time, to understand that there was not a Bible, or even as one of my professors had said, that there wasn't someone walking around with a pad and a pen making sure they quoted everything that he said. That was non-existent. In fact, the way that movement was transmitted was through oral communication. People just telling stories. Hey, guess what I heard? This is what someone over here said about that man. That's how it was told. Household after household, family after family. Now, that's not something I was exposed to as a Native American Christian person here in the United States. Is that the basic understanding that I had and that we have collectively is that what the history that we have experienced with the Christian faith was in essence God's will. In fact, the missionary movements that came upon this continent, the efforts to save us from our savage ways, things of that nature, things that we've seen in history books, or I'll rephrase that. things that some of us have seen in history books, because our own people don't even know that history yet. But what I recognized was that when Christianity came to this continent and had contact with our ancestors here, there was a belief that everything that was happening was God's will. And it was all articulated in the book that we now know as the Holy Bible. That everything was in order, that it was really just a matter of us accepting this plan for all of creation. We've all heard the stories of us being born into sin, us always looking to be reconnected with God through certain understandings of Jesus' life. We've heard that. We've heard it in church after church, sermon after sermon, even to this day. We've heard that. But what I began to recognize as I did my studies is that there was more to it. In fact, there was much more to it. That even something that the first editions of the Bible weren't constructed until hundreds of years after Jesus walked on this earth. I began to scratch my head a little. I began to say, wait a second. No one's ever preached that to me. And I think one of the times that that really caught me, and I tell this story all across the country and to classes, is I can remember sitting in my New Testament class with my professor who is a really close mentor to me now, Dr. Dennis Smith from Phillips Theological Seminary. And we were sitting there, and I'm in my mid-20s, just now starting out, trying to fulfill God's will in my life, trying to get my education so I can become a preacher, a pastor. And we're sitting there in this class, and one of my fellow students raises their hand and says, "What do you mean that Luke didn't author the Gospel of Luke?" And some of our fellow students were kind of snickering at them, and I guess it was common knowledge to know that Luke didn't write that. But I put my head down on the table because in my mind was the exact same question. Because the only way to understand the Bible that I was taught was to take it literally, to take it inerrantly. There's no errors in that. That's God's plan for all of humanity. That's how I approached it. And when I heard something like, we don't know who wrote Luke, I was like, what's going on here? Someone hasn't told me the whole truth. But everything didn't kind of come to a head until I started studying Christian history. When I saw when the church came into these hemispheres with our indigenous peoples all throughout the Americas, or what is known as the Americas now, and they actually debated on whether indigenous peoples of South America, Central America, and into North America, they actually debated on whether we were human beings or not. They actually debated on whether we had souls or not and were worthy of salvation.
Wow.
Everything crumbled. I said, wait a second. What gives you the right to debate our ancestors? What gives you the right to say that you're doing God's will? And needless to say, I almost walked away from the entire faith. My whole career, I said, no. I have a way of life. I have, the Creator gave us a language, gave us a way of living together in wholeness. I'm going to go do those things. And so, needless to say that it was a long journey that I came to a rationale that today I still am a practicing clergy person within the United Methodist Church.
So, Chebon, when you mentioned going to seminary, how did your traditional ways come in? Was that something that you practiced growing up, or was it something that you started later in life?
No, that's something that I'll say I was exposed to all throughout my life. We would go dance, we'd go, get our regalia together, green corn, things of that nature. But I would say that we never took it as serious as we should have. In fact, one of the things that I was told, and I was told this by my mom, and I love my mom, and she's still here, and I'm thankful. But one of the things that we always were encouraged to do, or actually told to do, was that if you're going to go dance, you're going to be at church the next morning. This is what you're supposed to do. And so that's what we did. And so most of our attention went to church, not to our ceremonial practices. When I finally began to put some of the pieces back together, when I saw the impact of Christianity on our native people, when I about walked away from the Christian church altogether to just start learning my language, just to start learning who the Creator made me to be, the first thing that I had to say was, I've got to take my spiritual life seriously. I have to go and do everything within my power to expose myself and my family to our ceremonial way of life. And thankfully, that my companion in life that I had married before all of this started, thank goodness, who's been faithful and journeyed with me, her father-in-law was one of our traditional people, is one of our traditional people, and he was active at the Hilabi ceremonial grounds. And so I can remember to this day, asking us, I'd like to come, and the way we say it is, we come and touch medicine, with you when the time comes. And I don't know how he felt about that. We've never had that conversation yet, but he was kind enough to say, okay, well, here's what will be required of you if you do something like that. And so, needless to say, that was that first step of taking back what I feel was taken from me, that opportunity to be absorbed in our way of life. And so I was thankful. And one thing led to another, year after year, and my whole family now, that's our primary form of spirituality, I guess you could say, is what they say, is that that's what we do. And so as I went into ministry, now while all of this transition was going on, I was serving a church. I was serving the Pawnee Indian Methodist Church in Pawnee, Oklahoma. And the few members that were there kind of went on this journey with me. And so I kind of said, no, I'm going to be gone on this particular weekend. This is what I have to do. And they understood that. And as time went on, as I was appointed to another congregation here in the central Oklahoma, they too began to be understanding. And okay, on this given Sunday or this given weekend, our preacher is not going to be here. And the way I articulated that was, I hope that people understood that it was me trying to become better, a better native person, a better spiritual person, a better leader for their community, a better servant of their community. And for the most part, they understood that.
Now, growing up, I grew up where my grandparents were members of the church and the pastor of the churches. And being native, there was always a divide between our Christianity belief and then our traditional way of life. Did you have any of those internal struggles going to the ceremonial ground at that point?
I think I did. Now, whether they were manifested where I could see them is probably the more difficult question. I can remember going to my family's ceremonial ground, places where my grandfather served as a second chief, and I can remember wearing things like a wooden cross because I wanted people to see I have no problem dancing, and at that time I was probably a teenager, 15, 16 years old, and I had no problem with that. But I do remember there was a little bit of a resistance, that it still wasn't the ultimate fulfillment of the Creator's will. There was still that anxiety that, and what I call that is the Christian anxiety of salvation. What is it that God is asking of you? That was still going on, and so I felt like I needed to be in church. Like, at the end of the day, I still had a guilt that, I need to be over here. And even, I can remember that first time, that, sitting there underneath the arbor, I still had that guilt. Just when I was just a member learning, doing these things, years and years ago, I still remember that Sunday morning when our ceremonies were over, I still had a little bit of a guilt and saying, oh, I need to get to church. And needless to say that as time has gone on, that's changed. But I think that segregation, that boundary, just because of our history as a Native community who has been traumatized by Christianity, I believe it's there in all of us, whether we realize it or not. What I've witnessed over the past decade as I've tried to dedicate my life to living in the identity that the Creator has given all of us, what I've witnessed is that there's an anxiety that exists in our people, that we might even call it a confusion of what does God ask of us? What does the Creator ask of us? And even I've seen our own traditional people come up to me and express their gratitude because I was not ashamed to say I go to the ceremonial grounds. The last time I saw a departed loved one was at the grounds. They come up to me and said, thank you for saying that. And the question that I say is, why are we embarrassed? Why are we ashamed of doing the things that the Creator has given us to do, of doing the things that has given us wellness? And to be honest, Jeremy, why are we ashamed of doing the things that has helped to preserve us to this day, to survive the experience of the birth of the United States, the movement of Christianity, the efforts of colonization, all of those things, but we still exist today? Is that the way that I teach that now is that we're not a mistake. We're meant to be here. We were given a way of life where we took care of each other, and there's nothing wrong with that.
So Chebon, with now doing traditional way of life and traditional ceremony, and then also having a Christian going to seminary and also being active in the church, did your family have any concerns, or how did they feel about it?
I do believe they had some concerns, and it was more probably had to do with that I was going through an experience, I was going through a transition that they had no knowledge of. I had now a seminary education, which even amongst Native American United Methodist clergy people, there's still only a handful across the country that have that type of an education. So I think there was a sense of pride that I was able to accomplish that, but then what it exposed me to, I'm not sure they were ready for that.
Yeah.
What I learned, I'm not even sure I was ready for that, even to this day. I catch myself contemplating back to how life was simpler without this knowledge. But I'm thankful that I now understand the truth. So I think some of my family just had questions. Well, what does this mean? Why aren't you different? Why won't you come preach at a revival? Which I still preach at revivals to this day, but I don't preach the way they expect. One of the things that I never do is that, and this might be surprising to some of our Native clergy people across the state and country, is you'll never hear me engage in any type of altar call, ever. And that's even at a revival setting. Because the way that I look at that those are moments of us reminding ourselves how we're supposed to live. Not a moment of trying to perpetuate what I call spiritual violence on the people so that they now worry about their spiritual destination for all of eternity. That had nothing to do with the first generations of the Jesus movement. It was just calling the people to accountability, to say, oh, you say you feed the hungry, then why are there people starving across the street? So too for us, we say we're kind people, but why are we being cruel to those that are different than us? So I think my family wanted to know what that was about. Now, I'm sure they had more concerns than I knew about. Maybe even asking my mom and dad, what's going on with Chebon? Why does he do this? But at the end of the day, and this is something that I'm thankful for, the path that I took and am taking is something that still they can find pride in. Because who can argue against the giving of your life to serve the people? You know, the doing what we can to maintain our songs, to maintain our medicine, to maintain our fires. Who can argue against that when it's all about our people? And I think they have found a new sense of pride in that, and I think they're thankful for it. I do think they still have questions. They're like, why? But why? You know, even just looking at some of the scholarship that I've been a part of over the past 4 or 5 years, I don't believe they would even quite understand as to why I engaged in some of that work.
Well, Chebon, you seem like a pretty young guy. Or do you get any pushback or flack from our elders about your age and the role that you are right now?
I think there is some concern that I haven't given every year of my life to our ceremonial way of understanding. But as we look at some of our communities and the things that we're going through on this day, what we realize is that the nature of our Native communities is very fragile right now. Is that even as we're starting to lose so many of our elders, so many of those who have provided us with the foundation to exist as Mvskoke people, we're starting to realize, you know, how big the burden will be once we've lost them. And even in some of our communities, some of our fluent speakers, some of our traditional people, that's the only way that they have lived. Even some of them did not live to be the age of 60. You know, they may have passed on for various reasons in their 50s and sometimes even in their 40s. And so what I would say is I think there is some concern. Now, I don't believe it's anything that's personal against myself or how old I am, because the way that I express what I do in serving our people from our ceremonial town and even providing for other people across the state is that the rationale that I use is I'm going to do everything within my power to maintain our identity so that our grandchildren will have this way of life. And that is one of the key components of our identity as Mvskoke people, is that we think about, you know, the impact of what we're doing on them, and that hopefully through our lives that we live, hopefully they will have the same things. They will have songs to sing. They will have things to take care of them. They will have this way of life. So I think there is a concern, but life has put us in this position, because I think the preference will always be, I want my elders here. You know, I want those who are fluent in our language to be our leaders. You know, I would be happy to be a servant, to just be a warrior, and to just obey the orders of our ceremonies. I would be content with that if they were still here. But as the Creator has chosen, as life has gone on, for some of our communities that's not the case. And so what I say is, I ask, this is what I was taught by my elders, is that we ask the Creator for forgiveness for those things that we may not be able to do as generations before us. But I'm going to do everything within my power, within my memory, within my strength, to maintain our way of life.
So, growing up the way I did in a Christian home, and you had a different journey. You grew up in a Christian home, but also maintained those traditional cultures. Do you feel like, is that something that can be blended, or do they need to stay separate?
Whether we realize it or not, I believe that we blend them in our understanding of the world, in our communications with the Creator. Even if we were a person who took to prayer time and we ended that prayer with an amen, automatically you're taking an influence that is Christian. So I think we automatically do that. My preference right now, because I've seen the impact professionally, academically, the impact of Christianity on our native spirituality and our practices, I try to make sure that there is no more of that influence. One example is when we talk about the spirit world. When we talk about those that have departed this walk of life, have gone on, we in our language, we use different analogies, we use different ways of returning to the power of the earth, things like that. In the Christian concept, they would say he's gone on to heaven. He or she has gone on to heaven. My hope is that we can always feel the freedom to talk about the presence of that spirit world, to use our understanding of the cosmos and maintain that. But nowadays, it's easier to say, well, they've gone to heaven. But then that leaves the question, the people listening to us talk, our children, Christians, automatically in the back of their head is heaven versus hell type of understanding, Christian understanding. So I'm cautious on blending the two. My hope is that for those members of the Christian church, that they would be catalysts for opening the doors for people to come back to their true identity and their true spirituality, as opposed to closing those doors and saying, no, that's not what God wants you to do, or no, that's not going to be a good way of life. You guys do something that's evil over there. My hope is that people in the Christian church will begin to understand we're all of us are seeking wellness in all of its many forms. All of us want to pursue a life and a life more abundant. We all want to live life to the fullest. And so for us today, I think it's the healthiest to at least maintain somewhat of a boundary so that we can, first of all, identify those characteristics that we still have left that are indigenous, our identity. Now, if a person wants to go and find wellness in Christianity, that's their understanding. That's between them and their Creator. But I would hope that we would be able to make that distinction to say, this is why I believe what I believe. Now, that can be confusing to some because in today's day and age, we want to incorporate everything. In church services, one of the things that we try to do, we have to have native imagery. Let's bring a drum in. Let's bring some decorative blankets. Let's bring a shawl, and let's put a shell up there with some sweetgrass and things like that, and for so that people will know these are our holy items. And for the most part, I don't mind doing that. But what I would say is because our identity it can stand up on its own. I want us to take that we don't need the Christian church to attain wellness, to attain our own salvation of joy and living in the fullness of the day like the Creator would want us to. I want us to understand it stands on its own. And so that's one of the things that I hope that through the course of my work, I'll be able to take them through that step-by-step process. But the reality is I have to understand that just decorating an altar inside of a church with a blanket that might have images of our people on it, just putting sweetgrass on that altar, I've even seen our ball sticks put on those altars. Some people have never seen something like that in their life. In fact, I was in Chicago last year helping some of our United Methodist churches work with indigenous peoples, and they decorated it like that. And they asked me to bring a few words to the group, and they had one of our traditional people from the First Nations community in Canada, and she came down and she was looking all around the room and she said, I have never seen a church decorated like this. It was the first time. So I try to have compassion for those that have never seen that before. But I also believe that it's my calling to continue to push us, to say, here's why I make a distinction.
Any final words would you like to give to our people out there that's listening to the interview?
My hope is that we would all come to an understanding of how fragile our identity is in this day and age. And that there was a time when we could just go next door and speak to one of our elders who was fluent in our language. There was a time when even going to ceremony, going and fasting and being with our tribal towns, we would just walk down the road. But today things have changed a little bit. We're finding ourselves being more and more isolated, away from our own people. Even in the midst of our tribal nations, it's becoming different than it used to be. So my hope is that we can come to an understanding that we have to do everything possible to maintain our identity and our way of life. And sometimes that means using mechanisms that our elders didn't have access to. Mechanisms such as media, social media, doing things a little bit differently. It's not that we don't want to. It's that it's more that we realize how important it is to maintain this way of life. So the viewpoint that I've taken is that I'll do everything within my power to share what little bit that I know, what little bit I can be a part of with anybody who wants to listen, in hopes that maybe somehow I can help them open that door to coming back to their first identity. And so I find myself, I'm always involved with classes, with different organizations, teaching about our way of life, teaching our children, and even, participating in some of our non-ceremonial activities, such as, when we dance, when we have indoor dances and things. I know some of my elders weren't always open to that, but I can remember my grandpa's brother one time back in it was either the early 90s or late 80s, where he had held an indoor dance that was in conjunction with the church, because he hoped that they were both working for the same thing. Wellness, wholeness, the removal of suffering. And that's my hope too, is that we can enjoy being who we are. If a young girl or a young boy leads, or if the young lady shakes shells for the first time in her life at an indoor dance, or if the young boy leads for the first time at an indoor dance, I can't take away from that opportunity. That they've taken that first step to coming back to who they are. And if someone wants to criticize me that it was at an indoor dance and not at one of our ceremonial dances, I would say that's okay. Because soon enough, they'll be coming all the way back. And so my hope is that we continue to provide opportunities for them to come and ask questions, to ask what clan they are, to ask about our language, to ask about our dances, why we do them. So my hope is that we could all understand that we live in a day and time where time is more than of the essence. We have to realize that there's a very strong possibility in just a few generations from now that we might even lose our language. we might even lose some of our songs. Even some of our sacred ceremonial grounds may not be here. But my hope is that we do everything within our power to ensure our way of life will always be here for our grandchildren and their grandchildren.
Well, with that, we sure do appreciate Chebon joining us today. Please check us back out online and our other interviews to come. Chebon, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Jeremy.